Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Darkling Halls of Ivy by Lawrence Block. Narrated by Peter Berkrot and Teri Schnaubelt. Something to Skip. A foreword by Lawrence Block. After 2 years as an English major at Antioch College in Yellow Springs, Ohio, I landed a job in the summer of 1957 as an editorial associate at a literary agency. I had just sold a story to a magazine, and my duties each day consisted of reading stories by writers every bit as hungry for success as I, and with even less likelihood of attaining it. Moreover, they were willing to put their money where their words were, and paid $5 a story to have their work considered for representation by my employer, the world-famous agent. If a story ran over 5,000 words, the fee was higher, another $1 for every additional 1,000 words. The fee topped out at $25 for a book. Of course, the boss never laid eyes on the stories. The eyes laid thereon were mine, and the long detailed letters explaining why, their obvious talent notwithstanding, this particular story didn't work and couldn't be repaired. Those were my work, and each time I wrote one, I earned one of the $5 they'd paid. But I look forward eagerly to reading your next submission. Right. The job was the best education a new writer could have, and I dropped out of school to keep it, and wrote and sold magazine fiction when I wasn't dashing the neatly typed dreams of hopeless hopefuls. I decided, though, that a year was enough, and in the fall of 1958 I was back in Yellow Springs, ready to put in 2 more years as a student and walk away with a bachelor's degree. Not in the cards, I'm afraid. By then I was writing and publishing paperback fiction, and spending a disproportionate amount of time drunk or stoned, and completely at sea in my studies. And how are you going to keep 'em down on the campus after they've seen Greenwich Village? I tried to drop out after a month or so, realizing I'd made a huge mistake, but I was persuaded to stay. Bad move. I couldn't get through Paradise Lost or Roderick Random, and was utterly baffled by a course I'd enrolled in to satisfy a core requirement that began with a quick refresher on Newtonian mechanics before moving on to quantum theory. I never even took high school physics, and I had no idea what the hell they were talking about. I figured a Newtonian mechanic was a guy who could help you out if your Newton's engine was misfiring. I figured quantum theory had something to do with the beads that served as currency for Native American tribes. I figured... oh, never mind. Come summer, I fled to a furnished room in New York and resumed writing books. I was midway through one called Campus Tramp when a letter came from the Student Personnel Committee. It said they thought I might be happier somewhere else. And you know what? They were right. And here I am, late in life, typing these words in my office in room 108 of the Leonora McClurg Center at Newberry College, in, Newberry, South Carolina. I'm spending the semester as writer-in-residence, conducting both a fiction-writing workshop and a literature course, reading crime fiction for pleasure. How did that happen? Over the years, I've occasionally entertained the notion of a sojourn in academia. It has long been a compelling fantasy, replete with ivory-covered walls, a book-lined study, a glowing hearth, eager students, and you can take it from there. Not the least of its virtues as fantasy was that I needn't worry about ever having to see it fulfilled. A fantasy brought to life is almost always a disappointment. And yes, that's probably true even of the naughty little 3-way you've been secretly drooling over for years. My own guilty pleasure was safely unattainable, because what institution of higher learning would stoop to hire some clown whose highest credential was a high school diploma? Shows what I know. On a whim, I shared the fantasy in a newsletter, and one thing led to another, and almost before I knew it, I'd been offered the very gig I'd been dreaming of. But could I accept it? Did I really want to put my life on hold for a third of a year, while I took up a position for which I was clearly unqualified? And wouldn't it get in the way of my real work? I'll spare you an account of my mental backing and forthing. In the end, I decided that John Greenleaf Whittier was right to proclaim, "It might have been," as the saddest words of tongue or pen, and that in this particular instance I'd rather regret taking a chance than not. And then there was Patrick O'Connor's example. Pat was a remarkable fellow, worldly and erudite, an editor and publisher, a renowned dance critic, and a qualified ski instructor. At one point in his later years, he had an opportunity to be certified in some arcane specialty as an appraiser of something or other, if I recall correctly, and was wondering whether it was worth jumping through the requisite hoops. Patrick, a friend, told him, "I think you should do it. You may never do anything with it. It may have no practical effect on your life, but it's just the sort of detail that really fleshes out an obituary." It was the prospect of teaching that got me thinking about the darkling halls of ivy. In recent years, age has taken a toll of my energy and imagination. Fewer stories come to mind, and most of the ones that do remain untold. Now would be the time to throw myself into a hobby, but perversely I've sold my stamp collection, purged my library, and lost interest in accumulating anything, irrespective of its capacity for sparking joy. So I've looked to fill the hours with activities that would provide the illusion that I was still a writer, without obligating me actually to write anything. Through the miracle of self-publishing, I've made almost my entire backlist available in ebook and print-on-demand paperback form. It consists in large of pseudonymous work I'd tried to keep secret for decades. Go figure. I filled even more hours enlisting narrator/producers for joint venture audio self-publishing, and teaming up with translators to self-publish German and Italian and Spanish editions. And, perhaps the last refuge for a non-writing writer, I've compiled anthologies. What could be simpler? You round up a batch of excellent writers, provide a theme, and get out of their way. They write the stories, you contrive to put them in some sort of sequence. Alphabetical order is always safe. And write 1,000 words or thereabouts as a foreword, so that readers will have something to skip. If there's a tricky part, it's finding a suitable premise. Even in a cross-genre anthology like this one, the stories ought to have something in common. But you don't want everybody writing the same story. The 18 stories in the Darkling Halls of Ivy, as you'll see, are as individual as fingerprints. They have, as far as I can make out, only 2 things in common. They're all set in the world of higher education, and they're all to be found at the darker end of the spectrum. Oh, and one thing more. They're all excellent. And, to reiterate, there are 18 of them. I mention that because in recent years my anthologies have almost always consisted of 17 stories. I'd be hard put to tell you why. I can't deny a distinct fondness for the number 17, but it's well below the Mendoza line for obsessions. But there are 17 stories in Sunlight or in Shadow, 17 in Alive in Shape and Color, 17 in At Home in the Dark. One of the writers I invited to the Darkling Halls of Ivy was the remarkable Peter Lovesey, a cherished friend with whom I've largely lost touch in recent years. I wasn't surprised to learn he had way too much on his plate to write a new story, but was happy indeed when he suggested I might consider reprinting an earlier one, and happier still when Birdie and the Boat Race turned out to be a perfect fit for TDHOI. Thus, the volume you hold in your hands, or listen to on your e-reader, does in fact contain 17 new stories, with an additional classic for Lagnappe. Maybe I'm not as far below that OCD Mendoza line as I might prefer to think. Requiem for a Homecoming by David Morrell. Did they ever find who killed that female student? Ben asked. Despite the heat and the crowded pub, he still shivered from sitting in the open convertible during the homecoming parade. After 20 years living in Malibu, he'd forgotten how cold autumn nights could be in the Midwest. He took for granted the people he'd waved to hadn't the faintest idea why he was in the parade. They cheered for the actor on the movie poster propped behind him, not the screenwriter whose credit was in fine print at the bottom. Female student? Howard asked. Ben and Howard had been graduate students in the English department back then. Now Howard taught here, and Ben had accepted the guest of honor invitation, despite a screenplay deadline, so he could spend the weekend with his long-ago friend. "The one that got stabbed in the library," Ben answered, "on homecoming Saturday, our final year." "Now I remember," Howard said, lowering his beer glass. "Of course. Her." "Are you guys okay?" a female voice asked. Ben looked at the waitress, who had purple hair and a ring through her left nostril. She gestured toward their nearly empty beer pitcher on the table. "We're good," he answered. "Thanks." As she pushed her way toward the next booth, the din of the celebrating students gave Ben a headache. "So far as I know, they never proved who stabbed her," Howard said. "There was a rumor," Ben said, "about Wayne MacDonald." He referred to an assistant professor who joined the faculty that autumn. A week after the murder, the assistant professor had died when his car veered off a highway and flipped several times before plunging into a ravine. The deaths so close together may have been a coincidence, but after the police discovered that the murdered student had come from the same college where MacDonald had recently earned his Ph.D., there was talk that they'd been connected in other ways, that MacDonald had killed her and committed suicide. "Nothing was proven," Howard said. "All of that happened 20 years ago. What made you think of it? Coming back to campus?" "Do you remember her name?" "After so much time?" "Rebecca Markle," Ben said. "How?" "You must have looked it up on the internet." "Didn't need to. I never forgot how terrified everybody on campus felt after her body was found in the library. When I moved to Los Angeles, Ben had received a scholarship to the grad school film program at USC. I kept thinking she was in a place she could take for granted was safe. How surprised and helpless and afraid she must have been when the attack occurred. The first screenplay I sold began with a version of what happened to her." "I noticed," Howard said. "Do you remember what she looked like?" "From photos in newspapers 20 years ago?" Howard shook his head. Ben pulled his wallet from his jacket and removed a photograph. The edges were bent, the color faded. It showed a young, attractive woman, thin, with long blonde hair, expressive eyes, and an unhappy smile. "You keep her picture in your wallet?" Howard asked. "From the yearbook back then. After the college invited me to be guest of honor this year, I cut it out." "What on earth for?" "There was a memorial section for the 5 students who died that year. One drowned at the reservoir, one committed suicide, one had cancer, one got drunk and fell off a balcony at a frat party." Ben paused. "And Rebecca got stabbed to death in a secluded section of the library. You still don't recognize her?" "No. She was in the modern novel course we took that term." Howard sat straighter. "What?" The din of the celebrating students seemed louder. "Wayne MacDonald taught that course," Ben said. "I remember he taught it, but not who was in it. There must have been 100 students. Why didn't the police make a big deal about her being in the course? It would have been another connection between her and Wayne." "Are you sure you guys are good?" the female voice asked. Ben turned toward their now weary-eyed server. "I bet you could use this booth for people who drink more than we do. I hope you don't mind. Tips can be generous at homecoming. The more people I serve. Here's something to make up for us hogging the booth." Ben gave her more than what she'd probably receive all week. "I used to work part-time in the kitchen here. I know how hard it is to pay tuition. Howard, if you're not tired, I'd like to walk around the campus." After the heat of the pub, the night's chill stung Ben's cheeks. He zipped up a jacket Howard had lent him and shoved his hands in its warm pockets. The noise of the crowd remained in his ears as they crossed the street toward the college. Arching tree branches obscured a quarter moon. A gentle breeze scraped leaves across a path. "The trees are bigger," Ben said, "but the ivy on the buildings looks the same. How's your family?" "Our daughter graduated from here 2 years ago." Howard referred to his stepchild. "She works for an advertising firm in New York." Great. And your wife? No better. Sorry. Depression isn't anybody's friend. Their footsteps crunched through the leaves. The reason the police didn't make a big deal about Rebecca Markle being in that class is that they didn't know, Ben said. Her name wasn't on the list of students taking the course. She wasn't registered. How do you know? I dated her. Howard turned to him in surprise. She and I sat next to each other at the back of the lecture hall, Ben said. We got to talking. I asked if she'd like to go to a movie. We had a few beers afterward. You never mentioned it. It didn't seem important. All she talked about was Wayne MacDonald, how brilliant he was, how she could listen to him forever. I never asked her to go on another date. I forgot about her until I saw her photo in the newspaper and realized who'd been killed. What about the police? Did you tell them? Working part-time in that pub barely earned enough for my dorm fees. You know how I paid my tuition. Selling uppers to guys in our dorm who waited too long to study for exams or write term papers. I helped them pull all-nighters. I always wondered where you got the pills. The police would have wondered, too. How long would it have taken them to make a drug dealer a suspect? They could have decided I was furious because Rebecca refused to go out with me again after she discovered how I earned money. Or they might have decided I shut her up after she threatened to tell the police I sold drugs. Neither would have been the truth. But by the time the police realized it, my reputation would have been dirt. I just received a scholarship to USC. I couldn't risk losing it. The night breeze turned colder. Ben pushed his hands deeper into the jacket's pockets. And you've been thinking about her ever since? Howard asked. I remember her sitting across from me in the pub we just came from. The same booth, in fact. Tonight, you sat exactly where she did 20 years ago. You're creeping me out. I'm going to write about her again, but this time it won't be only a brief scene. It'll be about a man who feels guilty because his ambition might have let a murderer escape 20 years earlier. He comes back for his college homecoming to find who did it. You're here doing research? Howard asked. And to see you again. It's been a long time. Yeah, somehow we could never get our schedules to match, Howard said. Sounds like an interesting movie. Well, it has a lot of twists. For example, the main character's best friend dated the murdered woman also. In the darkness, Howard peered down at the murky leaves. On the street far behind them, car horns blared. Engines roared. Students whooped. The night became quiet again. I didn't date her, Howard said. She pointed at you in class. She told me you went out with her. It wasn't a date. She told me she hoped I wasn't going to try what you did. It wasn't what it sounds like. What was it then? Ben asked. I often visited Wayne during his office hours. You knew that. You were his favorite student. He hadn't adjusted to being a faculty member, Howard said. He missed being in graduate school. He liked hanging out with me. A couple of times he invited me to his apartment to have dinner with his wife and 3-year-old daughter. I said office hours. Actually, he met students in the cafeteria at our dorm. It was obvious he was avoiding his office. It was also obvious he had something he wanted to say to me. Finally, he told me there was a female student who wasn't registered for his classes, but was showing up for all of them. He told me she'd followed him from his previous college, that he'd given up a job offer there because of her. Another horn blared in the distance. More students whooped. Why did she follow him? Ben asked. Wayne swore he hadn't been involved with her. He'd been hired as an instructor in his last year at the previous college. Rebecca Markle had been one of his students. He said he treated her like any other student, but she thought he meant more than what he was actually saying in his lectures, that he was sending her coded messages, telling her she was special to him. Remember how he made eye contact with every student as he lectured? He scanned back and forth, making it seem he spoke directly to each of us. A gifted teacher, Ben agreed. What did he want you to do? To talk to her, one student to another, and persuade her to leave him alone. Not only him, He said his wife had seen Rebecca outside the apartment building where they lived, and outside the nursery school where his wife dropped off and picked up their daughter. They were scared. The night's chill made Ben shiver. After Rebecca was murdered, did you tell the police about what he'd asked you to do? No. Why not? That would have made him a suspect, and I didn't believe he killed her. Where are you going with this, Ben? Is what I did any different from what you did? Keeping quiet because you were afraid the police would suspect you? Sorry for being intense. You remember how I used to get when we were students and I was working on a story. Where am I going with this? Back to the hotel to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be busy. First came an alumni breakfast, where he told good-natured Hollywood gossip about what happened behind the scenes of the films he'd written. Then he gave advice to actors in the theater department. Then he spoke at a lunch for major donors, emphasizing how he wouldn't have had a career if not for the excellent education he'd received here. At the football stadium, he met numerous dignitaries and the college president's skybox. When he'd been a student, he hadn't been able to afford to go to a football game. This was the first game he'd ever seen that wasn't on television. Even from the top of the stadium, he heard the crack of helmet against helmet. When the second half started, he pretended to walk toward the nearby men's room, passed it, descended stairs, and reached the car-crammed parking lot. In autumn sunlight that made him squint, he walked past brilliantly colored maple trees toward the library. Having written a film about electronic surveillance, he noticed cameras on various buildings, cameras that hadn't been there 20 years earlier, and that might have recorded Rebecca Markle's movements. Ben passed the English Philosophy Building and climbed the stately steps to the column-flanked doors that led to the vast library building. Inside the echoing vestibule, he needed a moment to orient himself after not having been here for 20 years. Then he shifted to the right, passed through an archway, and entered an area where numerous computers occupied rows of tables. On homecoming Saturday, while a football game was in progress, only a few students studied the screens. There were cameras here as well. If they'd been installed 20 years earlier, they'd have recorded Rebecca Markle passing through this room, and perhaps have revealed someone following her. He went to the back of the room, passed through an arch, and climbed stone stairs. More cameras. He could have used an elevator, but he'd once written a scene in which a character got a nasty surprise when stepping from an elevator, and the intensity of writing that scene had stayed with him ever since. On the third landing, he passed beneath another camera, walked along a narrow corridor lined with books, turned a corner, proceeded along a further corridor of books, and entered a small, square, windowless area that had a desk and a wooden chair. He'd visited here several times during his final year. In his imagination, he had returned here many times since. It was here that Rebecca Markle had been murdered. He peered down at the floor. She'd lain in her blood after the killer had attacked from behind, reaching around her, plunging a knife into her chest, plunging repeatedly. Footsteps made him turn toward the only entrance to this area. Howard appeared. "You followed me?" Ben asked. "Didn't need to." "Oh?" "If you're researching Rebecca's murder, the logical place for you is to be here, at 3:30 when the medical examiner estimated she was killed," Howard said. "I watched the library entrance from the far side of the English Philosophy Building." "You could have been a detective instead of an English professor. Or someone in a movie you wrote. Do you seriously think I killed her?" "I never suggested that." "Like hell. You set me up last night. Did they ever find who killed that female student, you asked? You must have enjoyed listening to me pretend I didn't remember who Rebecca Markle was. Then you forced me to admit I'd gone out with her. It wasn't a date. I was trying to help Wayne." "Okay," Ben said. "It wasn't a date. I can play your game in reverse. Last night, you gave all sorts of reasons for me to believe you killed her. Maybe she threatened to tell the police how you earned your money. Maybe you couldn't bear the thought of USC finding out and canceling your scholarship." "That would have been a powerful motivation," Ben agreed. "It would have made more sense than any motive you tried to invent for me." "I don't believe you killed her." Howard looked surprised. But role-playing helps me write stories, Ben said. If this were a detective movie, you'd be a suspect until somebody else seemed likely. So you're convinced Wayne did in fact kill her? He had a sort of alibi, because a few people remembered seeing him at the football game. But according to the rumor, he slipped out the same way I did. I bet when I go back to the game, no one will realize I've been gone. He'd need to have brought a knife, Howard said. I can't imagine him cold-bloodedly planning to murder someone. If only there'd been cameras in the library 20 years ago, Ben said. They might have shown someone following Rebecca, just as today they showed you following me. But I don't believe she was followed. You think the attack was random? Howard asked. A predator saw her alone in here? An attempted rape turned into murder? Or perhaps someone was already waiting? I don't understand. Perhaps Rebecca came here to meet someone. Now you're back to Wayne. No one else had a motive, Howard said. He took a step forward. The tiny space felt even smaller. I shouldn't have come back, Ben said. Maybe not, Howard told him. Would you like to know how my script would end? Never make your audience impatient. The audience would suddenly realize that seemingly casual remarks made earlier were actually clues. There'd be a quick cut to a previous scene. How's your family? The detective asked. Our daughter graduated from here 2 years ago, the apparent suspect answered. He meant his stepchild. And your wife? The detective asked. Depression isn't anybody's friend, the apparent suspect answered. A quick cut to another scene would show the apparent suspect talking about spending time with the assistant professor, his wife, and their 3-year-old daughter. Howard stepped even closer. Yes, I spent a lot of time with Wayne and his family, he said. And with his wife and daughter after Wayne died, Ben said. Damn it, somebody had to. People assumed Wayne was the killer. They avoided his wife. Their little girl wasn't welcome at the nursery school any longer. I was the only person who showed them kindness. She wanted to leave town, to take her daughter and live with her parents in Minneapolis, while she tried to recover from Wayne's death and figure out what to do next. I told her if she ran, people would believe they were right to suspect Wayne. She had to stay, to show them they were wrong. You were in love with her? Ben asked. From the first time I saw her. Ben peered down at the floor where Rebecca Markle had lain. Yes, I shouldn't have come back. So how is your screenplay going to end? Howard asked. Wayne's wife. Yes, what about her? Could have asked Rebecca to meet her in the library. Rebecca wouldn't have expected any trouble here. Afraid for her family, Wayne's wife begged Rebecca to leave her husband and child alone. When Rebecca refused, she turned and walked away, Wayne's wife. Pulled the knife from her purse? Howard asked. She planned it? As a last resort. After she saw Rebecca at the daycare center, she was desperate. In the story, Howard said. Yes, in the story. Then maybe Wayne suspected what she'd done. Maybe he saw blood on the sleeve of a blouse or a sweater his wife had been wearing. Maybe he became so distressed he couldn't concentrate, until a week later he lost control of his car and... In the story, Howard repeated. Yes, in the story. What's that movie where everybody sees the same thing but every version is different? It's Japanese. Rashomon. I remember we watched it together. Your story could be like that. Different versions of what happened. None truer than the other. Me killing her. You killing her. Wayne killing her. A predator killing her. But not Wayne's wife, Ben asked. Definitely not Wayne's wife. She couldn't have done it. She had an alibi. She was at home taking care of their little girl. Yes, to meet Rebecca, she'd have needed a babysitter, Ben said. Someone she trusted. Someone who maybe saw blood on a sleeve when she returned home. Someone who never mentioned it to the police or contradicted her when she told the police she'd been taking care of her little girl at the time of the murder.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?